The heavy mahogany gavel hovered in the air, suspended like a guillotine blade, waiting to drop on my neck. The courtroom smelled of stale coffee and my sister Bianca's expensive Chanel perfume. She sat at the plaintiff's table, looking immaculate in a white suit that cost more than my entire year's salary. Her husband Greg was already tapping his foot against the floor, probably calculating how quickly they could sell my inheritance to fund his failing real estate schemes. My mother sat right behind them, refusing to even look at me. Your Honor, the defendant is clearly incapable of maintaining the property in question, Bianca's lawyer sneered, sliding a motion across the polished wood table. We request immediate transfer of the title to Mrs. Bianca Davis to prevent further dilapidation. It is what their late grandfather would have wanted. The audacity stole the breath from my lungs. My mother nodded vigorously, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. The judge, a tired man with thick glasses, looked down at me with pity. I stood there alone, no high-priced attorney, no family support, just me and my thrift store blazer. Ms. Jenkins, the judge, sighed, looking at the clock. Do you have any final objections before I sign this order? The room went silent. I could hear Greg chuckle under his breath. I looked at the heavy wooden doors at the back of the room. They remained closed. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my voice to remain steady. I do not object to the transfer, Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. I only object to the timeline, because the actual owner of the estate has not arrived yet. Bianca let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Oh, stop it, Keisha! Grandpa is dead. You are stalling. But then the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom groaned open. The sound echoed like thunder. A hush fell over the room as a man stepped through. He was elderly, but walked with a terrifying authority, dressed in a black suit that looked sharper than a knife's edge. He held a thick envelope in his hand. The judge squinted, then his eyes went wide. He reached for his glasses with a trembling hand and whispered, "That is impossible." Is that Mr. Sterling? Bianca's smile faltered. Greg stopped tapping his foot, and I finally allowed myself to smile. My sister thought she walked into that courtroom a multimillionaire. She had no idea she was about to leave it with absolutely nothing but the debt on her credit cards. My name is Keisha, and at 32 years old, I have spent my entire life being the invisible child, the archivist, the one who liked old dusty things while my sister chased shiny new ones. They thought my love for the past made me weak. They did not know that sometimes the past holds secrets that can destroy the present. Before I tell you how a single diary entry worth $50 million ruined my greedy family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you. Growing up in Atlanta, my family was obsessed with appearances. But behind the closed doors of our suburban home, there was a clear hierarchy. Bianca was the golden child who could do no wrong, and I was the mistake they kept around to do the chores. But 3 months ago, when my grandfather Otis passed away, everything changed. He left Bianca some money, but he left me a rotting wooden cabin in the middle of nowhere. My family laughed when they heard the will. They are not laughing anymore. Let me take you back to the day the war began. To understand why I stood alone in that courtroom, you have to go back to the humid afternoon in July when we lowered Grandpa Otis into the ground. The Georgia heat was suffocating, rising off the pavement in shimmering waves, but the chill coming from my family was colder than the grave itself. I stood at the edge of the burial plot, my vision blurred by unstoppable tears. I was wearing a simple black dress I had bought at a discount store 5 years ago. It was slightly too tight and the fabric did not breathe, but it was all I had. I did not care about how I looked. I only cared that the one person who had ever looked at me with unconditional love was gone. Beside me, my sister Bianca looked like she was posing for a magazine cover. She wore a tailored black designer suit that probably cost $5,000 complete, with a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses that covered half her face. She was not crying. In fact, she looked bored. Every few seconds she would discreetly lift her wrist to check the time on her gold watch, tapping her manicured foot impatiently against the grass. She treated the funeral of our grandfather like an inconvenient dentist appointment she just wanted to get over with. My mother Joyce was no better. She was fluttering around the VIP tent, shaking hands with local politicians and business owners. She was playing the grieving daughter, perfectly accepting condolences with a practiced grace, but I knew the truth. She was networking. She was using her own father's funeral to secure business deals for Bianca's spa chain. She had not shed a single real tear since he died. I let out a sob that was a little too loud, unable to hold back the wave of grief. Immediately, I felt a sharp elbow dig into my ribs. "Get a grip, Keisha," Bianca hissed, leaning close to my ear so no one else could hear. "You are making a scene. Your face is all blotchy and you are sniffling like a child. It is embarrassing. Look at the mayor over there. Do you want him to see you looking like a wreck?" I wiped my nose with a crumpled tissue, looking at her in disbelief. He was our grandfather, Bianca. He raised us when Dad was working double shifts. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Bianca adjusted her sunglasses and sighed. People die, Keisha. It is a part of life. But reputation is forever. Mom is trying to secure an investor for the new downtown location, and you standing here looking like a tragic charity case isn't helping the brand. Go sit in the back if you cannot control yourself. I looked over at my mother, hoping she would intervene, hoping she would tell Bianca to show some respect. But Mom just caught my eye, frowned at my tear-stained face, and motioned with her head for me to move away from the main family line. She was demoting me. At my own grandfather's funeral. I swallowed the lump in my throat and stepped back, retreating into the shadows of an oak tree. That was my place in the Jenkins family. Hidden. Quiet. Less than. But as I watched them lower the casket, I whispered a promise to the only man who ever saw me. I promised him I would not let them erase him. I had no idea that in 48 hours, his last will and testament would turn my grief into a battlefield. 2 days after the funeral, we gathered in the stuffy wood-paneled conference room of the family attorney, Mr. Henderson. The air conditioning was humming loudly, but it did nothing to cool down the feverish greed radiating from my sister and her husband. Greg was practically vibrating in his chair, his eyes darting around the room as if he were already appraising the furniture. Bianca sat with perfect posture, clutching her designer handbag like a shield, ready to receive what she believed was her royal birthright. My mother sat between them, pointedly, turning her back to me. I sat alone at the far end of the long mahogany table, my hands folded tightly in my lap, just wanting this final formality to be over. Mr. Henderson, a man as ancient as the books lining his shelves, cleared his throat and adjusted his spectacles. He skipped the pleasantries and went straight to the distribution of assets. To my daughter Joyce, he read, his voice dry as parchment. I leave the family trust fund and the primary residence in Buckhead. My mother let out a breath. She had been holding a small, satisfied smile touching her lips. She had secured her status. That was all that mattered. To my granddaughter Bianca, Mr. Henderson continued, I leave the sum of $200,000 in cash, along with my stock portfolio in diversified energy holdings. Yes? Greg hissed under his breath, actually pumping his fist under the table. Bianca's eyes lit up. I could practically see the renovations for her new spa flashing behind her eyelids. She squeezed Greg's hand, whispering something about finally ordering the Italian marble floors she had wanted. They looked at me, then their expressions shifting from triumph to pity. They knew there was not much left. And to my granddaughter Keisha, the lawyer said, pausing to squint at the paper. The room went silent. The air grew heavy. I leave the property located at 42 Oak Street, commonly referred to as the cabin, along with all personal contents contained within the structure. For a second, nobody moved. Then a snort of laughter broke the silence. It was Greg. He covered his mouth, but the laugh escaped again, louder this time. Bianca joined in a high-pitched giggle that grated on my nerves. Even Mr. Henderson looked uncomfortable. The cabin, Bianca choked out between laughs. You mean that rotting shed in the middle of the woods? Grandpa left you a pile of termites holding hands. My mother shook her head, looking at me with disdain. He must have been senile at the end, poor man. His mind was clearly going. Giving you that heap of firewood is not a gift, Keisha. It is a burden. He probably just wanted someone to clean up his mess so the estate would not have to pay for demolition. I felt the blood rush to my face. That cabin was where Grandpa and I had spent summers fishing and reading. It was not a mess to me. It was a sanctuary. Mr. Henderson slid a heavy iron key across the polished table. It spun slowly and stopped right in front of me. I reached out and covered it with my hand. The metal was cold, but it felt solid, real. While they celebrated their cash and stocks, I held on to the only piece of his life that actually meant something. "I will take it," I said quietly, staring down my mother. "Good luck paying the property taxes on a dump." Greg sneered, leaning back in his chair with the arrogance of a man who just won the lottery. "Just do not come asking us for a loan when the roof caves in on your head." I did not answer him. I just gripped the key tighter, unaware that this rusted piece of iron was about to unlock a war that would bring them all to their knees. As the heavy oak doors of Mr. Henderson's office clicked shut behind us, I tried to make a quick exit. I just wanted to get to my car drive to the nearest fast food drive-thru and process the fact that my grandfather was truly gone. But before I could reach the elevator, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. It was heavy, unwelcome, and accompanied by the overpowering scent of expensive cologne. "Keisha, hold on a second," Greg said, stepping in front of me to block my path. He had loosened his tie and was wearing that oily practiced smile he used on prospective clients who did not know they were getting a bad deal. "I wanted to talk to you just family to family, without the lawyers and the drama." I clutched the heavy iron key tighter in my pocket, the metal biting into my palm. "What do you want, Greg?" I asked, taking a step back to create some distance. He sighed, shaking his head with a performance of deep concern that almost made me nauseous. "Look, I know you are upset. But honestly, Grandpa did you a huge disservice leaving you that wreck. I know real estate, Keisha. That is my business. That cabin is not an asset. It is a liability. The foundation is probably cracked, the wiring is definitely not up to code, and the plumbing is likely shot. You are looking at $50,000 in repairs just to make it legally livable." He paused to let the number sink in. He knew exactly how much I made at the museum. He knew $50,000 was an impossible sum for me. "You do not have that kind of cash, Keisha." He continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And if the city inspectors come out, they will fine you until you go bankrupt. But Bianca and I, we want to help. We are family after all." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek leather checkbook. "We are willing to take it off your hands. $5,000, cash. I can write the check right now. You walk away with money in your pocket, buy yourself a nice car, and I handle the headache of tearing it down for the spa parking lot. It is a win for everyone." For a split second, the offer hung in the air. $5,000. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to pay off my credit card debt. It was an escape hatch. But then I looked at Greg's eyes. They were not kind. They were calculating. He was looking at me like I was a desperate prey animal he had cornered. Why would a man who just laughed at a property suddenly offer cash for it on the spot? Why was he so eager to buy a liability? Suddenly, Grandpa Otis's voice echoed in my head, clear as a bell, a memory from when I was 12 years old and we were planting the garden behind that very cabin. He had told me that people will always want to buy the fruit, but they will try to cut down the tree to get it. He grabbed my hand and said, "Never sell your roots, Keisha. The roots are where the life is." I looked at the checkbook in Greg's hand, then up at his fake smile. "Save your charity, Greg," I said, my voice shaking slightly but firm. "I think I will take my chances with the termites." I hit the down button on the elevator, leaving him standing there with his mouth open and his checkbook in the air. I did not know it then, but I had just dodged the first bullet in a firing squad. That evening, I packed my life into 5 cardboard boxes and drove my rattling Honda Civic to 42 Oak Street. The sun was setting, casting long skeletal shadows across the property. Standing in the overgrown driveway, looking up at the structure I had fought so hard to keep, I felt a seed of doubt take root in my stomach. Greg was right about one thing. The place was a disaster. The front porch sagged like a tired jaw, and the windows were caked with decades of grime. When I unlocked the front door with the heavy iron key, the smell hit me first, a mixture of mildew, damp wood, and abandonment. I flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. Of course. The electricity had been cut years ago. I used the flashlight on my phone to navigate the gloom. Huge cobwebs draped from the ceiling corners like ghostly chandeliers. Every step I took on the hardwood floor was answered with a high-pitched creak that echoed through the empty house. I set up a sleeping bag in the middle of what used to be the living room, surrounded by shadows. The silence was deafening. There were no city sounds here, just the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls and the unsettling scratching of unseen creatures in the attic. I sat there in the dark, eating a cold sandwich, feeling the crushing weight of my isolation. My family was probably at a steakhouse right now, toasting to their wealth while I was shivering in a ruin. For a moment, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. Maybe I was just being stubborn. Maybe I should have taken the $5,000. I eventually drifted into a restless sleep, clutching Grandpa's old flannel shirt for comfort. Then, the world exploded. A deafening crash shattered the silence. I screamed, scrambling out of my sleeping bag as shards of glass rained down onto the floorboards just inches from my face. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I shined my flashlight toward the window. A jagged hole gaped in the glass, letting in the humid night air. Lying amidst the glittering debris was a rock the size of a grapefruit. Wrapped around it with a thick rubber band was a piece of paper. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely undo the band. I unfolded the note. It was typed, not handwritten. 3 words in bold capital letters stared back at me: sell or die. I stared at the message, my breath catching in my throat. This was not a random act of vandalism. This was a message. A threat. My mind immediately flashed to Greg's face earlier that day, the way his eyes had gone cold when I refused his check. This was how they played the game: intimidation, fear. They thought that because I was the quiet sister, the archivist, the one who liked dusty books, that I would crumble at the first sign of danger. I looked at the broken window, then down at the rock. Fear was there, certainly. But beneath the fear, something else began to bubble up. Anger. Hot, righteous anger. They were trying to scare me out of my own inheritance. They were trying to bully me into submission. I did not pack my bags. I did not call the police knowing it would take them an hour to get out here. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, found a broom, and started sweeping up the glass. The sound of the bristles against the wood was rhythmic, steady. With every sweep, my resolve hardened. "You made a mistake, Greg," I whispered to the empty room. "You just declared war on the wrong sister." I taped a piece of cardboard over the hole, lay back down on my sleeping bag, and stared at the ceiling with my eyes wide open, waiting for the sun to rise. I was not going anywhere. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It only served to highlight the jagged teeth of the broken glass window and the shards scattered across the floorboards like diamonds. I was exhausted, my eyes gritty from a sleepless vigil, holding a broom handle like a weapon. When my phone vibrated against the dusty floor, the screen flashed Mom. For a split second, a foolish, childish part of me sparked with hope. Maybe she sensed something was wrong. Maybe, despite everything, a mother's intuition had told her that her daughter was in danger. I slid the answer button, my voice trembling. "Mom, thank God." "Last night, someone threw a rock through." "Keisha, what is wrong with you?" Her voice cut through my words like a razor. It was not worried. It was icy, trembling with suppressed rage. "Greg called me first thing this morning. He is furious, and frankly, so am I." I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, looking at the threatening note still sitting on the table. "Mom, listen to me. Someone threatened my life. They threw a brick through the window." I could have been hurt. Oh, stop being so dramatic, she scoffed, dismissing my fear as easily as if I had complained about the weather. You probably broke it yourself moving your boxes in. I am calling because you were incredibly disrespectful to your brother-in-law yesterday. He offered you a lifeline, $5,000 for that heap of trash. You should be kissing his feet. Instead, you marched off like a petulant child. The coldness in my chest spread to my limbs. She did not care. I could be lying bleeding on this floor and she would step over my body to sign the deed over to Bianca. He wants to bulldoze it, Mom, I said, my voice hardening. Grandpa loved this house. He left it to me. Grandpa is dead, she shouted, losing her composure. And the living need to succeed. Bianca has a vision. She is building an empire that lifts this entire family up. And here you are sitting on a potential parking lot like a stubborn mule just to spite her. You have always been like this. Selfish, jealous of your sister's success. That land is wasted on you. It is just dirt, Keisha. But in Greg's hands, it is the future. Do the right thing for once in your life. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Is that all, Mom? Do you care at all that I am unsafe here? There was a pause on the other end. A long, heavy silence that told me everything I needed to know. I care that you are embarrassing this family, she finally said, her voice flat. Sell the house, Keisha. Do not make us treat you like an enemy. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone and looked around the empty, broken room. The tears I expected did not come. Instead, a strange clarity settled over me. I had no mother. I had no family. I was an orphan with living parents. And if they wanted to treat me like an enemy, I would have to stop acting like a daughter and start acting like a soldier. I put the phone in my pocket and picked up the broom. I had a lot of glass to clean up. I barely had time to wash the glass dust off my hands before a white sedan with the city code enforcement emblem crunched up the gravel driveway. It parked aggressively close to the porch, blocking my path to the road. A man stepped out, adjusting his belt over a protruding stomach. He wore a uniform that was too tight and a smirk that was far too familiar. I recognized him immediately from Greg's backyard barbecues. His name was Miller, one of Greg's drinking buddies who worked for the city planning department. He did not knock. He did not say hello. He just pulled a clipboard from his passenger seat and started walking around the perimeter of the cabin, scribbling furiously. "Excuse me," I called out, stepping onto the sagging porch. "Can I help you with something?" Miller didn't even look up. He just tapped his pen against the clipboard and pointed to the overgrown lawn. "Grass height exceeds 6 inches. That is a violation of Municipal Code 402. That is a $500 fine." I stared at him. The grass was barely ankle high. "Are you serious? I moved in yesterday. I haven't even had time to find the lawnmower." He ignored me, walking over to the side of the house where the paint was peeling in long, dry strips. "Exterior maintenance violation," he droned, his voice flat and bureaucratic. "Peeling paint visible from the street. Another 500. He moved to the roof, squinting at the shingles. "Structural hazard. Potential for falling debris. That is a big one. $1,000. I marched down the steps, my blood boiling. "Stop it. I know who you are, Miller. I know you play poker with Greg every Thursday night. Did he send you here? Is this how you guys do business?" Bullying a single woman in her grandfather's house, Miller finally stopped writing. He turned to me, lowering his sunglasses to reveal cold, piggy eyes. He ripped 3 pink citation slips off his pad and shoved them into my hand. "Mr. Davis is a concerned citizen who cares about property values in this neighborhood," Miller said, his tone dripping with fake professionalism. "He mentioned there might be some blight issues out here. I'm just doing my job, Ms. Jenkins." And honestly, looking at this dump, he was right. He leaned in closer, invading my personal space. "These fines are cumulative, by the way. $2,000 today, $2,000 tomorrow, and every day until every single violation is fixed. If you cannot pay, the city places a lien on the property. Then we auction it off, usually to developers who want to clear the land." He smiled, then a nasty expression that told me exactly how much he was enjoying this. "If I were you, I would take whatever offer your family gives you. before the city takes it for free. He tipped his imaginary hat, got back in his car, and drove off, leaving me standing in the dust, clutching $2,000 worth of fines I could not pay. My hands shook, not from fear this time, but from the realization of their strategy. They were not just trying to scare me, they were trying to bleed me dry. I looked at the pink slips, panic rising in my throat. I had less than $300 in my bank account. Greg knew that. He was not just playing dirty, he was playing to kill. The sanctuary of the Atlanta History Museum was supposed to be my escape. For 7 years, the smell of old paper and the quiet hum of the archives had been the only things keeping me sane. But as soon as I swiped my badge at the employee entrance that morning, the red light flashed. Access denied. My stomach dropped. Before I could try again, the security guard, a man I had shared coffee with every morning, opened the door. He did not smile. He simply told me that Director Evans wanted to see me immediately. I walked into the director's office, clutching my purse tight. Evans sat behind his desk, refusing to make eye contact. On the surface of the desk lay a manila folder. "Sit down, Keisha," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "We received a disturbing package this morning. An anonymous tip from a concerned party regarding the theft of several 19th-century land deeds from our collection." My mouth fell open. "Theft, Mr. Evans? I would never touch the collection. You know me. I have dedicated my life to this museum." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a printed email detailing specific dates and times when I was supposedly seen taking documents home. The language used in the email made my blood run cold. It used words like liability, brand risk, and underperformance. These were not the words of a stranger. These were Bianca's words. She had not just tipped him off. She had crafted a narrative so damaging that no amount of truth could penetrate it. "The board has decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately," Evans said, finally looking up. "We cannot have a cloud of suspicion hanging over our archivists. Hand over your badge and keys." I tried to argue. I tried to explain that my sister was vindictive, that this was a family dispute spilling over into my professional life. But Evans raised a hand to stop me. "The decision is final, Keisha. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal effects." 10 minutes later, I was walking out of the building. I carried a small cardboard box containing a framed photo of Grandpa Otis, a coffee mug, and a potted succulent. As if on cue, the sky opened up. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking through my thin cardigan and turning the cardboard box soggy in my hands. I stood on the sidewalk watching the cars rush by, feeling a level of despair so deep it felt like physical pain. I had no job. I had no savings. I had a crumbling house racking up $2,000 a day in fines. And I had a family that was systematically dismantling my entire existence. Bianca had known exactly where to hit me. She took the one thing that gave me pride, the one place where I wasn't just the invisible sister. I stood there in the rain, shivering, realizing that this was not just about the house anymore. They wanted to erase me completely. The rain had barely stopped when a sleek black Mercedes pulled up the muddy driveway, looking utterly out of place against the backdrop of overgrown weeds and peeling paint. Bianca stepped out, grimacing as her expensive red-bottom heels sank slightly into the wet earth. She was dressed for a boardroom, not a demolition site, in a sharp navy blazer and white trousers that were dangerously close to getting ruined. She didn't knock. She simply pushed the front door open, wrinkling her nose as she stepped into the dim living room. "Well, this is even more depressing than I imagined," she said, her voice echoing off the bare walls. She looked around at my makeshift setup, the sleeping bag, the single lamp, the boxes. "It smells like failure in here, Keisha." I was sitting on a crate eating a granola bar because I couldn't afford a real dinner. I stood up slowly, wiping crumbs from my hands. "What do you want, Bianca? Did you come to inspect your handiwork? I'm sure you're thrilled about the museum." Bianca waved a hand dismissively, as if destroying my career was a minor detail. "Don't be dramatic. I did you a favor. You were rotting away in that basement with those old papers. Now you're free to move on. Or You would be if you weren't clinging to this disaster of a house. She walked over to the window I had patched with cardboard, running a manicured finger along the splintered frame. Look at this place. It's over, Keisha. Greg told me about the fines. I know you have zero income now. You can't fight the city, and you certainly can't fight us. She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a check, holding it out between two fingers like it was a dirty tissue. $10,000. That is double what Greg offered. Consider it a severance package from the family. Take it, move to a cheap apartment and start over. I'm trying to be the good sister here. I am doing charity. I looked at the check. $10,000. It was enough to survive for a few months. But looking at Bianca's smug face, I saw the truth. She wasn't winning because she was smarter. She was winning because she thought everyone had a price. She thought she could starve me out and then buy my dignity for pennies. I took the check from her hand. Bianca smiled, a cold, victorious curving of her lips. Smart girl. Now pack your— I didn't let her finish. I crumbled the check into a tight ball and threw it right at her face. It bounced off her forehead and landed on the dirty floor. Get out, I said, my voice low and steady. Bianca blinked, stunned. She looked at the ball of paper, then back at me, her face twisting into ugly rage. Are you insane? That is $10,000. You are broke. You have nothing. I have this house. I stepped closer, forcing her to back up toward the door. And unlike you, I have a conscience. I don't need your blood money, and I don't need your pity. Get out of my house, Bianca, and tell your husband that if he sends any more of his goons here, I won't just call the police. I'll go to the press. You will regret this, she shrieked, stumbling backward onto the porch. You will starve in this shack, Keisha. And when you come crawling back, the price will be zero. She slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I locked it, my heart pounding. I was terrified, yes. I had no job and no money, but as I watched her car spin tires in the mud and speed away, I felt something else. I felt powerful. They were desperate for this land, and I was going to find out why. Darkness didn't fall gradually that night. It slammed shut like a prison door. One moment I was reading a book under the weak glow of the solitary hallway bulb, and the next, the world vanished into absolute blackness. The sudden silence was even louder than the darkness. The comforting hum of the refrigerator died. The creaking of the old house settling seemed to amplify. Then came the sounds from outside. The heavy thud of boots on gravel, the metallic clang of a pipe being wrenched, and finally the aggressive roar of a truck engine peeling out of the driveway. I stumbled to the kitchen sink and turned the handle. Nothing, not even a drip. A dry hiss mocked me. Greg had moved from bureaucratic bullying to siege warfare. He had hired someone to cut the main water line and sever the power. He wanted me thirsty, blind, and terrified. He wanted me to run screaming back to civilization, begging for that $10,000 check. I stood there in the suffocating heat, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could feel the panic rising, a cold tide threatening to pull me under. But then my hand brushed against the top drawer of the counter. My fingers found the box of emergency candles Grandpa Otis always kept there. He used to say that a wise man trusts electricity, but a survivor trusts wax and wick. I struck a match. The flame flared to life, pushing back the shadows. As the warm yellow glow illuminated the peeling wallpaper and the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air, something shifted inside me. The house didn't look scary in the candlelight. It looked familiar. It looked like the stories Grandpa used to tell me about his childhood, about growing up in a one-room shack with nothing but love and grit. I realized then that Greg had made a critical miscalculation. He thought stripping away modern comforts would break me. He didn't know that I was raised by a man who built an empire out of dirt. I didn't need electricity to see the truth. I didn't need running water to wash away the fear. I didn't sit down and cry. I didn't call my mother to beg for forgiveness. Instead, I tied my hair back. I grabbed a trash bag. By the flickering light of 3 candles, I started to work. I dragged decades of debris out of the living room. I organized the scattered books. I swept the floor until my arms ached and my palms blistered. With every heavy box I moved, I felt lighter. With every pile of dust I cleared, I felt Grandpa's presence stronger than ever. He wasn't in the cemetery. He was here in the wood, in the walls, in the sweat on my forehead. They turned off the lights to blind me, but for the first time in my life, I could see exactly what I needed to do. I was not just cleaning a house, I was preparing a fortress. And I was ready for war. The adrenaline from the confrontation had finally faded, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache in my muscles. I was on my knees in the corner of the living room, surrounded by the debris of what my family called a ruin. The candlelight flickered against the peeling wallpaper, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock my solitude. I was trying to patch a section of the floor that felt dangerously spongy, worried that one misstep would send me crashing through to the foundation. I jammed the end of a rusty crowbar I had found in the shed under a particularly warped oak plank. It resisted at first, groaning in protest, the wood screaming, as the nails surrendered their decades-long grip. With a final sharp crack, the board gave way. I tossed it aside, wiping sweat and cobwebs from my forehead, fully expecting to see nothing but dirt and darkness below. But the candlelight caught something metallic. I froze. I leaned closer, grabbing one of the candles and lowering it into the gap between the joists. There, resting on a bed of dry insulation like a secret sleeping in a grave, was a box. It was not a modern safe. It was an old military-style strongbox, its green paint chipped away to reveal patches of orange rust, the metal dented and scarred. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a different rhythm than the fear I had felt earlier. This was anticipation. I reached down, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. It was heavy, far heavier than it looked. I grunted as I heaved it up onto the solid part of the floor, the metal making a dull thud that echoed in the silent house. Why would Grandpa hide this under the floor? He had a safe in his study at the big house, the one Mom had cracked open the day after the funeral to look for cash. Why was this box buried here in the place everyone despised? I sat there for a moment, just breathing, my hand resting on the lid. I felt a strange vibration, a hum of energy. I grabbed a screwdriver and jammed it into the rusted latch. I twisted with all my strength. The metal protested, screeching in the quiet room, until finally the lock snapped with a sharp pop. I lifted the heavy lid. A puff of stale air escaped, smelling of pipe tobacco and old paper, the scent of my grandfather. I coughed as dust motes swirled in the candlelight, settling on my clothes like gold dust. Inside there was no money. There were no jewels. Instead, the box was packed tight with bundles of envelopes yellowed with age and tied together with rough twine. And resting on top of them, looking pristine despite the years, was a thick book bound in black leather. My hands trembled as I reached for the book. The leather was cool and smooth under my fingertips. This was not just a collection of random items. This was deliberate. This was a time capsule. My family thought they had inherited the empire, but as I sat there on the dirty floor of a condemned shack, holding the heavy black book, I realized they had only inherited the facade. I had found the foundation. I opened the cover, and the first page crackled as I turned it. The first page was dated April 14, 1970. The handwriting was not the shaky scrawl of the elderly man I had known in his final years. It was sharp, elegant, and decisive. I began to read, and with every sentence the image of the grandfather I thought I knew dissolved, replaced by a stranger who was infinitely more complex. I leaned closer to the candle, squinting at the ink that had faded to a rusty brown. The entry read simply, "Signed the incorporation papers with Sterling today. The lawyers say my name cannot be on the public charter. They say the banks in Atlanta will not lend $1 million to a logistics firm if they know a black man from the South Side holds 50% of the equity, so I will be the shadow. Sterling will be the face. But make no mistake, the brain of this operation belongs to me." I sat back, my breath hitching in my throat. Sterling. The name sounded familiar, but I could not place it. I turned the page. May 1972. Revenue hit 2 million marks. Sterling wants to expand to shipping. I told him to wait. The oil crisis is coming. We need to buy trucks now while they are cheap. He listened. He always listens. My hands were shaking so hard, I almost dropped the book. My family, my mother, and especially Bianca, had spent their entire lives treating Grandpa Otis like a simple, uneducated gardener. They thought his money came from saving pennies in a jar. They mocked him for his dirty fingernails. But according to this diary, while he was pruning roses for the wealthy families of Buckhead, he was secretly orchestrating the movement of goods across the entire southeastern United States. He was not just a laborer, he was a titan in disguise. I flipped to the middle of the book, and something slipped out from between the pages, fluttering to the floor. It was a black and white photograph, glossy and well preserved. I picked it up and held it to the light. The photo showed a warehouse grand opening. There was a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Standing in the center was a young white man with a wide smile. But standing right next to him, wearing a tailored three-piece suit that fit him like armor, was Grandpa Otis. He looked powerful, dangerous even. He was shaking hands with a man I recognized immediately from the business news, a legendary real estate tycoon from the 70s. In the background of the photo hanging above the warehouse doors was a massive sign, Vanguard Logistics. The room spun. Vanguard Logistics was not just a trucking company, it was a multi-billion-dollar global conglomerate. It was everywhere. And my grandfather, the man my sister called senile, the man my mother dismissed as a relic, was the silent co-founder. I looked back at the diary. The last entry was dated just 3 weeks before he died. It was written in shaky letters. The family has lost its way. They worship the fruit, but despise the root. I cannot trust them with the empire. Not yet. Keisha is the only one who understands the value of holding on. If she keeps the cabin, she keeps the legacy. If she sells, she loses it all. I have set the trap. Now I wait to see if she is worthy. I closed the book, clutching it to my chest. Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of awe. I was sitting on a gold mine. My family was fighting over scraps over a parking lot, completely unaware that I held the keys to the kingdom. I looked at the dark corners of the cabin. It wasn't a ruin anymore. It was a test, and I was going to pass it. I turned to the very last page of the leather-bound diary, my heart still racing from the revelation of my grandfather's secret empire. Tucked securely inside the back cover, held in place by a yellowed strip of tape, was a small, rectangular object. I carefully peeled it free, terrified of damaging something so precious. It was a business card, but not a modern, glossy one. This was heavy cream-colored cardstock with raised black lettering that felt like braille under my thumb. It read simply, Sterling and Associates Attorneys at Law. There was no website, no email address, just a phone number with an old Atlanta area code and a handwritten note in blue ink at the bottom. Call when you truly need to protect the house. I stared at the handwriting. It was unmistakably Grandpa's, but stronger, firmer than I had seen it in years. He had anticipated this. He knew exactly what would happen when he died. He knew my mother would be blinded by status, that Bianca would be consumed by greed, and that Greg would circle like a vulture. He knew they would try to take the cabin from me. This card was not just a piece of paper. It was a lifeline he had thrown across time, waiting for me to catch it. I looked at the time on my cracked phone screen. It was nearly midnight. A rational person would wait until morning. A rational person would assume a law office was closed. But I was not feeling rational. I was sitting in the dark, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, holding a secret that could burn my entire family's false reality to the ground. My fingers trembled as I typed the number into my keypad. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before hitting the green call button. What if the number was dead? What if Sterling was dead? The diary was decades old. The line rang once, twice. The sound was jarringly loud in the silent cabin. On the third ring, the line clicked open. There was no automated menu, No hold music, no tired receptionist. Sterling, speaking a deep, gravelly voice, answered. It sounded alert, powerful, and utterly devoid of sleepiness, as if he had been sitting by the phone waiting for this specific call for 30 years. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Hello. My name is Keisha Jenkins. I am Otis Jenkins's granddaughter. There was a pause on the other end. It lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. Then the voice softened, losing its defensive edge and replaced by a tone of profound respect. Keisha, I have been expecting you. Is the house safe? The question took me off guard. Not how are you or what do you want? He asked about the house. It is still standing, I whispered, clutching the diary to my chest. But they are trying to take it. They are fining me. They cut the power, Good Sterling said, and I could practically hear him smiling through the phone. Let them try. They are just digging their own graves. Listen carefully, Keisha. Do not sign anything. Do not leave the premises. I will have a car at your driveway at 800 hours tomorrow morning. Bring the diary, bring the card, and bring your fight. It is time to execute the final phase of Otis's plan. The line went dead before I could say another word. I lowered the phone, staring into the darkness of the room. The fear that had been paralyzing me all day began to dissolve, replaced by a cold steel resolve. I was not just fighting for a shack anymore. I was a soldier reporting for duty, and tomorrow I was going to meet the general. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, a sleek black Bentley crept down my overgrown driveway, its polished chrome gleaming like a jewel against the backdrop of weeds and decay. It looked like a spaceship that had landed in a swamp. A man stepped out from the driver's seat. He was tall, African-American, built like a linebacker, but dressed in a suit that whispered quiet power. He didn't look at the peeling paint or the broken window. He looked directly at me. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, opening the back door with a white-gloved hand. "Mr. Sterling is waiting." I climbed into the leather interior, clutching the black diary and the old business card like they were holy relics. As we pulled away, leaving the cabin behind, I felt a strange sense of dislocation. Yesterday, I was cleaning up broken glass and eating stale granola. Today, I was being chauffeured into the heart of the city's financial district. We drove in silence until the skyline of Atlanta loomed above us. The car pulled up to the curb of the Vanguard Tower, a 70-story glass monolith that reflected the clouds. I had walked past this building 1,000 times, never knowing that the concrete foundation it stood on was paid for by my grandfather's sweat. We took a private elevator to the penthouse suite. The doors opened to reveal an office that was larger than my entire house. One wall was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the city. Sitting behind a massive desk was Mr. Sterling. He was older now than in the photos, his hair white as snow, but his eyes were sharp and blue. He didn't stay seated. He stood up immediately, buttoning his jacket, and walked around the desk to shake my hand. "You have his eyes," Sterling said, his voice rough with emotion. "Otis always said you were the one who watched the world while the others just consumed it." He gestured for me to sit. On the desk, a thick legal file lay open. "I assume you read the diary?" Sterling began, getting straight to the point. "Then you know that in 1970 your grandfather and I made a deal. I provided the face, he provided the logistics network and the initial capital. But because of the racial climate of the time, we created a shadow equity agreement." He tapped the file. "We called them sleeping shares. 15% of the company held in a blind trust to be awakened only upon his death and the fulfillment of his specific conditions." 15%, I repeated, my mouth dry. I tried to do the math in my head, but the numbers were too abstract. Sterling leaned forward, his expression deadly serious. "Vanguard Logistics is currently valued at $350 million. Your grandfather's stake, including accumulated dividends that have been reinvested over the last 50 years, is substantial." He wrote a number on a piece of paper and slid it across the mahogany desk. I looked down. The number was written in black ink. $52,000,000. $52 million, Sterling said softly. That is what your family is trying to bulldoze. That is what they are trying to trade for a $5,000 check. I stared at the paper. 52 million. It was enough to buy the museum that fired me. It was enough to buy Bianca's spa chain 10 times over. The room seemed to tilt. I wasn't just an archivist anymore. I was an heiress to an empire. But there is a catch, Sterling said, pulling the paper back. The trust has a fail-safe. Otis knew his family. He knew they would chase quick money, so he tied the entire fortune to that cabin. If the property is sold outside the bloodline, or if the structure is demolished, the shares dissolve into a charitable fund. The moment a bulldozer touches that wood, the money vanishes. I looked up at him, realizing the magnitude of the game we were playing. Bianca and Greg didn't just want to destroy a house. They were unknowingly standing on a detonator that would blow up the very fortune they were so desperate to find. So we have to stop them, I said, my voice steady. No. Sterling smiled, and it was a predatory smile. We don't just stop them. We let them walk into the trap. And then we close the door. Otis knew that wealth without wisdom is just a recipe for disaster. Sterling said, his fingers tracing the edge of the leather diary. He watched your mother spend money before she earned it. He watched your sister use people like disposable tissues. He knew that if he simply handed them $50 million, they would burn through it in a decade and be left with nothing but debt and bad habits. He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the city he helped build. So he created the preservation clause. It is a simple but ironclad condition buried deep in the trust's bylaws. To inherit the sleeping shares, the beneficiary must demonstrate the capacity to value history over immediate profit. Sterling turned back to me, his eyes locking onto mine. The condition is specific. The heir must maintain ownership of 42 Oak Street and ensure its structural integrity remains intact for a minimum of 1 year after his death. The house is not just a house, Keisha. It is the physical representation of the trust. It is the key. As long as the house stands and remains in your name, the trust is active. I felt a chill run down my spine. And if it doesn't, I asked, already dreading the answer. Sterling's expression hardened. If the property is sold to a developer, or if the structure is demolished to make way for new construction, the trust automatically dissolves. The shares are liquidated immediately, and 100% of the proceeds are transferred to the United Negro College Fund. The family gets nothing. Not a single dime. I sat back in the leather chair, stunned by the brilliance and the brutality of Grandpa's plan. It was the ultimate test of character. He had given me the house because he knew I was the only one who saw its value beyond the price of the land. He had given Bianca the cash because he knew she would never look twice at a rotting cabin. So Bianca and Greg aren't just trying to steal a house, I said, my voice barely a whisper. They are actively trying to destroy the only thing that could make them rich. Exactly, Sterling nodded. They are like men trying to burn down a bank vault to get to the copper wiring in the walls. They have no idea that the real treasure is the vault itself. If Greg brings a bulldozer to that property, he isn't just knocking down wood and plaster. He is incinerating $52 million. He slid a thick document across the desk toward me. This is a copy of the clause. It is your shield, but it is also your weapon. You have two choices, Keisha. You can tell them right now. You can show them this document, and I guarantee they will stop the harassment instantly. They will probably fall at your feet and beg for forgiveness just to get a piece of the pie. I looked at the document, thinking of the rock through my window. I thought of my mother's cruel phone call. I thought of Bianca laughing at me at the funeral. If I told them, they would pretend to love me again. But it would be a lie. They would love the money, not the sister they tried to erase. Or, I asked, looking up at Sterling. Or Sterling said, a glint of mischief in his eyes. You let them play their hand. You let them take you to court. You let them state on the public record exactly what they intend to do with that house. And then when they have trapped themselves in their own greed, we spring the lock. As the Bentley glided through the morning traffic insulated from the noise and chaos of the city, I stared at the folder in my lap. $52 million. It was a number so large it felt abstract like the distance to the moon. But the power it represented was very real. For a fleeting, foolish moment, a wave of relief washed over me. I could end this war right now. I could tell the driver to take me to my mother's house. I could walk in, slam this folder on the dining room table, and watch their jaws drop. I could pay off their debts. I could buy peace. I could finally buy their love. I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over my mother's contact name. I began to type a text. Mom, we need to talk. I found something. It changes everything. Please just listen to me. I was about to hit send when a new message popped up on my screen. It was from her. I froze. The preview showed a long block of text. My heart jumped, thinking maybe she was apologizing. Maybe she had realized she went too far yesterday. I unlocked the phone and opened the message. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I just got off the phone with Greg, she wrote. He says you are still refusing to sell. You are a selfish, ungrateful waste of space. Your father and I are ashamed to call you our daughter. Honestly, I wish you had died instead of your grandfather. At least he contributed something to this world. You are just a burden. Do us all a favor and disappear. I read it once, then twice, then a third time. I wish you had died. The silence in the car was absolute. I looked out the window, watching the happy families walking on the sidewalk, mothers holding their daughters' hands. I looked back at the screen. The tiny, hopeful flame that had been burning in my chest, the part of me that was just a little girl wanting her mommy to love her, flickered and went out. It turned into cold ash. If I told them about the money now, they would not love me. They would just love the bank account. They would pretend. They would lie. And the moment the cash was transferred, they would go right back to wishing I was dead. I looked at the preservation clause in the folder. Grandpa Otis knew. He knew exactly who they were. That was why he gave me the power. Not to save them, but to judge them. I slowly backspaced, erasing the message I had typed. I did not reply to her. Instead, I turned off my phone and slipped it into my pocket. Mr. Sterling, I said to the partition separating me from the driver, although I knew he could not hear me. I think we will go with option 2. I was not going to tell them. I was going to let them sue me. I was going to let them drag me into court and scream their hatred for the world to hear. I was going to let them dig a hole so deep that when the truth finally hit them, they would never be able to climb out. They wanted a burden fine. I would be the heaviest burden they ever carried. I leaned back against the leather seat and watched the city skyline fade as we headed back to the cabin. The war was on, and I finally had the ammunition to win. The roar of the diesel engine vibrated in my chest before I even saw the machine. As the Bentley turned onto Oak Street, dropping me off a safe distance away so I could maintain my cover, I saw the cloud of dust rising above the treetops. My stomach tightened. Greg had wasted no time. He was not waiting for the city to auction the house. He was forcing the issue. I ran the last 100 yards, my breath catching in my throat. Parked right at the edge of my property line was a massive yellow bulldozer. Its steel tracks were churning up the mud, and its front bucket was raised high, poised like a fist, ready to strike. But the machine was not the only thing there. Greg was standing on the hood of his truck, phone held high, live streaming to his followers. "Hey guys," Greg shouted at his screen, flashing a blinding white smile. "We are out here doing the Lord's work today, cleaning up the blight, getting ready to break ground on the new Davis Spa and Wellness Center. Sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands to improve the community value." He signaled to the operator in the bulldozer cab. The engine revved louder, belching black smoke. The operator pulled a lever and the machine lurched forward. With a sickening crunch, the steel bucket smashed into the old wooden fence that surrounded Grandpa's garden. Wood splintered and flew into the air. The ancient rose bushes Grandpa had planted 40 years ago were crushed under the treads in seconds. Greg cheered, panning his phone camera to capture the destruction. "See that out with the old, in with the gold." I did not scream. I did not run to Greg, begging him to stop. I remembered Sterling's words. Let them state their intent on the record. I pulled out my own phone and hit record. Then I walked straight toward the bulldozer. The operator saw me first. He slammed on the brakes, the machine jerking to a halt just 10 feet from where I stood. The bucket swayed dangerously above my head. Greg spun around, nearly dropping his phone when he saw me standing there calm and immovable in the path of the destruction. "Get out of the way, Keisha!" Greg yelled, jumping down from his truck. He marched over to me, phone still recording, aiming the lens right in my face. "You are trespassing on a construction site." I held my phone steady, capturing his face, the bulldozer, and the crushed fence. "I am standing on my property, Greg. And you just destroyed a boundary fence on a deeded estate. Keep the camera rolling. Tell your viewers exactly what you plan to do." Greg sneered, playing to his audience. "I plan to level this termite nest. I am going to flatten every inch of this rotting shack to make way for progress. And there is nothing a broke, unemployed librarian can do to stop me." "Thank you," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "I just needed you to say that." The operator killed the engine. "Look, buddy, I am not running over a lady," he yelled out the window. "Sort your domestic mess out." Greg turned purple. He got right in my face, whispering so the live stream could not hear. "You think you won? I am serving you with a court order tomorrow. We are taking this house legally. And when we do, I am going to let you watch me drive this dozer right through your bedroom wall." I lowered my phone and looked him dead in the eye. "See you in court, Greg." He stormed off, signaling his crew to pack up. As the heavy machinery retreated, leaving deep scars in the earth, I saved the video file. He thought he was intimidating me. He had no idea he just provided the smoking gun evidence that would cost him $52 million. The next morning, the sound of a heavy fist pounding on my front door woke me from a restless sleep. It was not Greg this time. It was a process server, a bored-looking man in a wrinkled windbreaker who thrust a thick envelope into my hands and walked away before I could even blink. I sat on the porch steps and tore open the seal. Inside was a lawsuit filed in the Superior Court of Fulton County. Bianca Davis versus Keisha Jenkins. The legal jargon was dense, but the accusation was clear, and it was sickening. They were not just suing for the land, they were rewriting history. Attached to the complaint was a sworn affidavit from a doctor I had never heard of named Dr. Eris Thorne. The document claimed that he had treated Grandpa Otis in his final months and diagnosed him with severe vascular dementia and cognitive decline. It stated that at the time Grandpa wrote the will, leaving me the cabin, he lacked the mental capacity to understand his actions. It painted him as a confused, helpless old man who had been manipulated by his estranged granddaughter, which was their twisted way of describing me. My hands shook as I read the lies. Grandpa was sharp as a tack until the day he died. We played chess every Sunday. He quoted history books verbatim. This doctor was a phantom, a hired pen, paid to tarnish a dead man's legacy just so Bianca could build a parking lot. The lawsuit demanded an emergency injunction to void the current will and appoint Bianca as the sole executor of the estate for the protection of the family assets. I looked up from the papers, my vision blurring with rage. They were willing to drag Grandpa's name through the mud to label him insane just to get what they wanted. It was the ultimate betrayal. But then, a strange calm settled over me. I remembered the leather-bound diary sitting safely in my backpack. I remembered the date on the first entry, which was 1970. The preservation clause was not written last year. It was established decades ago, long before any fake doctor could claim he was senile. They had built their entire case on a lie about the end of his life. They had no idea that the legal trap was set at the beginning of it. By claiming he was incompetent and trying to void his wishes, they were actively proving they had no respect for his legacy. I pulled out my phone. I did not call Sterling immediately. First, I walked over to the spot where Greg's bulldozer had crushed the rose bushes. I took a photo of the court summons lying in the dirt next to the broken fence. "You want to play dirty, Bianca?" I whispered to the empty air. "Fine. Let us go to court." I was not afraid anymore. I was not the victim holding an eviction notice. I was the executioner holding the axe waiting for them to put their necks on the block. I picked up the phone and dialed Sterling's number. "They filed," I said when he answered. And they walked right into the kill zone. For the next 48 hours, the penthouse suite at Vanguard Tower ceased to be an executive office and transformed into a war room. Sterling did not just hire a lawyer, he assembled a tactical team of forensic accountants, private investigators, and litigators who looked like they ate sharks for breakfast. We sat around a massive glass table littered with coffee cups and legal pads, dissecting every move my family had made in the last 3 months. We started with the video I had recorded at the cabin. When the lead litigator, a sharp woman named Ms. Vance, watched Greg standing on the hood of his truck screaming about leveling the property, she actually smiled. It was a cold, dangerous smile. She paused the video, right where the bulldozer blade crushed the fence. "This is not just trespassing," Ms. Vance said, tapping her stylus on the screen. "This is willful destruction of disputed property and intent to cause emotional distress." He is admitting on camera that his goal is demolition. If we play this after he testifies that he wants to preserve the estate, he will be committing perjury in real time. Next, we move to the digital evidence. Sterling's team had subpoenaed the metadata from the email sent to the museum director, the one that got me fired. It took their tech specialists less than an hour to trace the source. The anonymous tip did not come from a concerned citizen. The IP address was registered to the private Wi-Fi network at Davis Spa and Wellness. Specifically, the computer in the CEO's office. Bianca didn't just tip them off, the specialist confirmed. She wrote the email herself during business hours. "We can prove a conspiracy to manufacture false evidence to cause you financial duress." She was trying to bankrupt you to force a sale. Then came the hardest part. I unlocked my phone and placed it in the center of the table. I had to show them the texts from my mother. The room went silent as Ms. Vance read the message where the woman who gave birth to me said she wished I had died instead of Grandpa. I felt a flush of shame heat my neck, but I forced myself to look up. Ms. Vance did not look at me with pity. She looked at me with respect. "This is painful, Keisha, but this is powerful. It proves that the family's motivation is not the well-being of the estate, but personal animosity. It destroys their credibility as loving relatives trying to help a mentally unstable daughter. We are going to enter this into evidence as Exhibit C." By the time the sun set over Atlanta on the eve of the trial, we had built an arsenal. We had the video, we had the IP logs, we had the texts, and most importantly, we had the preservation clause, which sat in the center of the table like a nuclear launch code. Sterling walked me to the elevator as the team packed up. "Remember," he told me, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "Tomorrow you do not have to win the argument. You just have to let them dig the hole. Let them lie. Let them scream. Let them think they have cornered you. And when the judge asks for the final word, we will drop the blade." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace. I walked out into the cool night air not as a victim, but as a trap waiting to be sprung. I was ready for court. That night, the contrast between my world and theirs could not have been starker. While I boiled water on a camping stove because the gas was still shut off, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a live stream alert. Greg could not help himself. He was broadcasting from a private room at one of Atlanta's most expensive steakhouses. I watched the screen, the blue light illuminating the peeling paint of the cabin walls. They were all there. Bianca looking radiant in a sequined dress, Greg loosening his tie with a glass of scotch in hand, and even my mother laughing with her head thrown back. The table was groaned under the weight of seafood towers and prime rib. To the future, Greg shouted, raising his glass. To the Davis Spa and Wellness Center coming soon to Oak Street, my mother chimed in, clinking her glass against his. And to finally putting this messy chapter behind us. Poor Dad. If only he had been in his right mind, he would have wanted this success for you, Bianca. I watched Bianca smile, a predator satisfying her hunger. Dr. Thorne really came through for us, she said, her voice slightly slurred from wine. His testimony tomorrow is going to be brutal but necessary. Once the judge hears how confused Grandpa was that Will is as good as trash. They were celebrating. They were toasting to their own cleverness, convinced that their money and their fabricated medical records had already bought the verdict. They thought the trial tomorrow was just a formality, a victory lap before the bulldozers rolled in. I turned off the phone, plunging the room back into silence. I peeled back the foil lid of my instant noodles, the steam rising up to warm my face. It was a 99-cent dinner on the eve of a $52 million judgment. I looked around the cabin. It was quiet. It was humble. But it was real. In the corner, my backpack sat ready, packed with the video of the bulldozer, the IP logs of the email, and the original diary of Otis Jenkins. Let them eat their steak, I whispered to the empty room. Let them drink their expensive scotch. Let them laugh. I took a bite of the noodles, staring at the photo of Grandpa on the mantel. They didn't know that every bite of food they were enjoying was bought on credit they could no longer afford. They didn't know that the judge they were so confident in was about to be presented with a contract that superseded their lies by 40 years. I wasn't nervous anymore. The anxiety that had plagued me for weeks had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. Tonight they were feasting like kings. Tomorrow they would learn that they were just fattened calves walking into the slaughterhouse. I finished my meal, blew out the candle, and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a woman who knows exactly where the bodies are buried. The Fulton County Courthouse was a cavern of marble and echoing voices designed to make you feel small. I stood near the metal detectors, watching my sister hold court in the center of the lobby. Bianca looked like she was attending a movie premiere. She was surrounded by her legal team, Greg, and even a few reporters she had tipped off. She was laughing, her head thrown back, radiating the confidence of a woman who believes she is untouchable. I took a deep breath. It was time for the performance of a lifetime. I slumped my shoulders, letting my posture collapse. I ruffled my hair to look disheveled and practiced a look of pure, unadulterated terror. Then I walked toward her. Bianca. I called out, letting my voice crack just enough to sound pathetic. She turned, her smile vanishing instantly. She looked me up and down with a sneer of disgust. What are you doing here, Keisha? Did you come to surrender before the bailiff throws you out? I stepped closer, ignoring the cameras and the staring strangers. I reached out my hand, trembling, and touched her sleeve. Please, I begged loud enough for the lawyers nearby to hear. I cannot do this. I do not have any money for a defense. I am scared, Bianca. Please just call this off. I will sign whatever you want. Just do not make me pay legal fees I do not have. Do not ruin me. Greg snickered, nudging his lawyer. But Bianca's eyes lit up. She did not see a sister in distress. She saw prey that had finally stopped running. She saw a chance to humiliate me in front of an audience. She yanked her arm away from my touch as if I were contagious. She stepped back, raising her voice so everyone in the lobby could hear her victory speech. It is too late for begging, Keisha. You had your chance. You could have taken the $5,000 and crawled back into your hole. But you wanted to play big. Now I am not just going to take the house, I am going to crush you. She leaned in, her face inches from mine, her perfume suffocating me. I want you to sit in that courtroom and watch the judge give me everything. I want you to hear the gavel drop and know that you are homeless. And then I am going to drive that bulldozer myself and flatten that ugly shack while you watch from the street. You are nothing, Keisha. You are a stain on this family, and today I am scrubbing you out. The lobby had gone quiet. People were staring. A few looked shocked by her cruelty. Even her own lawyer looked uncomfortable. I looked down at the floor, hiding the small, cold smile that was fighting to appear on my lips. She had just publicly confirmed her malice. She had confirmed she wanted to destroy, not preserve. She thought she was standing over my grave, but she had just dug her own. I understand, I whispered, backing away. I just wanted to give you one last chance to be a sister. Bianca laughed, a harsh barking sound. I do not need a sister. I need a parking lot. I turned and walked toward the courtroom doors, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. The trap was primed. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the snap. The bailiff called out the name, Joyce Davis. I watched my mother rise from the bench behind the plaintiff's table. She smoothed the skirt of her navy blue dress, touched her pearl necklace, as if checking for a pulse, and walked toward the witness stand with the slow, burdened gait of a grieving daughter. She did not look at me. Not once. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and then sat down to dismantle my entire existence. Bianca's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Mr. Gentry, approached the stand with a sympathetic tilt of his head. He asked her about Grandpa Otis in his final months. He asked about his mind. My father was confused. Mom said, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing to the jury. He would forget names. He would get lost in his own house. It was heartbreaking to watch a titan fade like that. And who was caring for him during this decline? Mr. Gentry asked. Keisha was, she answered, and for the first time she looked in my direction. Her eyes were hard, devoid of any maternal warmth. But I told her to stop. We all did. We saw how agitated he became when she was around. Mr. Gentry nodded slowly. Did you ever witness any specific incidents that caused you concern? My mother took a deep breath. She dabbed at a dry eye with a tissue. Yes. About 2 weeks before he died, I went to the house to bring him some soup. I heard yelling from the study. When I opened the door, I saw Keisha. She was shaking him. She had him by the shoulders, and she was screaming at him to sign some papers. He looked so terrified. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. I felt a physical blow to my chest, as if she had reached across the room and punched me. It was a lie, a complete, total fabrication. I had never raised my voice at Grandpa in my life. I looked at the jury. They were staring at me with disgust. They saw a monster who abused an elderly man. I gripped my pen so hard the plastic barrel cracked. My instinct was to jump up and scream, to call her a liar, to defend myself, but I felt Sterling's gaze burning into the back of my neck. I remembered the plan. Let them dig. I looked down at my legal pad. I did not object. I simply wrote down the words. Witness claims physical abuse. Date unverified. Motivation financial. Mr. Gentry continued. Mrs. Davis, why do you think your daughter would do such a thing? Mom looked down at her hands. Keisha has always been troubled. She has struggled with mental instability since she was a teenager. She was jealous of her sister. She felt entitled to his money. I believe she forced him to write that will in a moment of fear. She is not well, and she certainly is not fit to manage the estate. I wrote that down too. Claim of mental instability. No medical history provided. The pain of hearing my own mother describe me as a dangerous lunatic was searing. It felt like being orphaned in real time. But as the ink flowed onto the page, the pain transformed into cold, hard data. She was on the record now. She had sworn under oath that I was abusive and crazy. She had locked herself into a narrative of hate. I finished my note and looked up. My mother was weeping into her hands and the jury was eating it up. They thought they were watching a tragedy. They had no idea they were watching a perjury that was about to cost my mother her share of $52 million. I capped my pen, sat back, and waited for my turn. Greg took the stand with the swagger of a man who was already measuring the judge's chambers for new curtains. He did not look like a grieving relative involved in a family tragedy. He looked like a visionary CEO pitching a Fortune 500 company. He flashed a charming practiced smile at the jury, unbuttoned his suit jacket, and leaned into the microphone as if he were about to share a secret that would make them all rich. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Greg began, his voice smooth as expensive bourbon. My wife and I are not here because we want to take something away from Keisha. We are here because we want to give something back to this city. He signaled to his lawyer, who set up a large easel displaying a vibrant, artist-rendered concept of the proposed Davis Spa and Wellness Center. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. The drawing showed glass walls, lush rooftop gardens, and happy, diverse people drinking green juice. It looked like paradise. This property, as it stands, is a cancer on the neighborhood. Greg continued, gesturing to a grainy photo of my cabin that made it look darker and more ominous than it actually was. It drags down property values. It invites pests. It is a hazard. But this is the future. We are talking about 50 permanent jobs for local residents. We are talking about tax revenue that will fix our roads and schools. We are talking about turning a rotting relic into a beacon of health and prosperity. The jury was nodding. Even the judge looked impressed. Greg was painting a picture where I was the villain holding back progress, and he was the knight in shining armor, coming to save the community from mediocrity. But Greg, arrogant as ever, did not know when to stop. He was so drunk on his own sales pitch that he forgot the cardinal rule of the courtroom: never answer more than you are asked. So, Mr. Davis, his lawyer asked, setting him up for the closing argument, if the court grants you executorship today, what is your immediate plan for the structure at 42 Oak Street? Greg grinned. He looked directly at me, his eyes gleaming with malice. We are not going to waste time with renovations, he declared proudly, his voice booming. That shack is beyond saving. The moment the deed is in my hand, I have a demolition crew on standby. We are going to bulldoze it flat. We are going to rip out every rotten board, every rusted pipe, and clear the land completely. We are going to erase that eyesore so thoroughly that no one will even remember it existed. Total demolition. That is the only way forward. The court stenographer's fingers flew across her keys, capturing every syllable. I watched the words appear on her screen. Bulldoze, erase, total demolition. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a single text from Sterling, who was sitting in the back row. Got him. Greg sat back looking satisfied. He thought he had just delivered the final blow to my defense. He had no idea he had just confessed on public record to the exact intent that triggered the nuclear option in Grandpa's trust. He hadn't just promised to build a spa, he had promised to incinerate $52 million. I looked at him and finally let myself smile. It was a small, sad smile for the fortune he had just thrown away. I stood up slowly when the judge indicated it was my turn to cross-examine. Since I could not afford a lawyer after losing my job, I was representing myself. The courtroom shifted in their seats, expecting a train wreck. I walked to the podium, clutching the edge of the wood to steady my shaking hands. This was not stage fright. It was the vibration of a sniper holding her breath before the shot. Bianca sat in the witness stand, looking down at me with a mixture of boredom and pity. She checked her manicure, signaling to everyone that I was beneath her notice. Mrs. Davis. I began, my voice quiet. You heard your husband testify that his plan is to demolish the property at 42 Oak Street. Do you share this vision? Bianca sighed, leaning into the microphone, as if explaining simple math to a toddler. Obviously, Keisha. We are building a future. You cannot build the future if you are clinging to a rotting past. I nodded, acting defeated. I looked down at my notes. But that house is the last physical piece of our grandfather. It holds his history. Are you telling this court that you have absolutely no intention of preserving even a small part of it? No renovation? No restoration? Bianca rolled her eyes. The jury was watching her, and I saw a flicker of annoyance in her jaw. She hated being questioned by me. She hated that I was wasting her time. There is nothing to preserve, she snapped. It is a health hazard. It is a pile of dry rot and termite damage. Keeping it standing is not sentimental. It is negligent. I took a step closer to the witness stand. I needed her to say it clearly. I needed her to scream it, so the court reporter would type it in bold. So just so the record is crystal clear, I said, hardening my voice. If the judge grants you executorship today, you are making a binding commitment to the court that you will destroy the structure. You will not leave one brick standing. Bianca's patience snapped. She saw my question as a desperate attempt to guilt her, and she wanted to hurt me. She wanted to crush my hope publicly. She leaned forward. Her face twisted into a mask of pure venom and shouted directly into the microphone. Yes, I will smash it this afternoon if I can. It is garbage, Keisha. It is a worthless, ugly heap of trash, just like your career. I will bulldoze it into the dirt, and I will laugh while I do it. Are you happy now? Is that what you wanted to hear? The shout echoed off the high ceilings. The judge's eyebrows shot up. The jury recoiled at the sheer volume of her hatred. I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I did not feel small. I felt towering. She had just screamed her confession. She had just publicly executed her right to the inheritance. Yes, Bianca, I said, my voice calm and steady in the ringing silence. That is exactly what I wanted to hear. No further questions, Your Honor. I turned and walked back to my table. I sat down next to my backpack where the sleeping shares contract lay waiting. Bianca was breathing hard, looking triumphant, thinking she had just put me in my place. She had no idea she had just lit the match that would burn her entire world to ash. The silence that followed Bianca's scream was absolute. It hung heavy in the courtroom, a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Her chest was heaving, her face flushed with the exertion of her hatred. She looked toward the jury, expecting approval, expecting them to nod along with her righteous anger against the eyesore that was my inheritance. Instead, she found them recoiling. She had dropped the mask of the concerned businesswoman and revealed the petty, destructive tyrant underneath. But she didn't care. In her mind, she had won. She had shouted me down. I stood there for a moment, letting the echo of her words bulldoze and smash settle into the record. I looked at the court stenographer, who had paused, her hands hovering over the keys, eyes wide. I looked at the judge, whose face had hardened into a scowl of distaste. And then I looked at Bianca. Slowly, deliberately, I let the facade of the terrified, broken sister drop. I straightened my spine. I lifted my chin, and I smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was the smile of a chess player who just watched their opponent move their king directly into a checkmate. Thank you, Mrs. Davis, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a bell. Thank you for confirming your intentions under oath. You have been very clear. Bianca blinked, confused by the sudden shift in my tone. She hesitated as she stepped down from the witness stand, smoothing her dress, looking uncertainly at Greg. Greg frowned, sensing a change in the atmospheric pressure of the room. He leaned over to whisper something to his lawyer, but it was too late. I turned to the bench. The judge looked down at me over his spectacles, clearly ready to wrap this up and go to lunch. Ms. Jenkins, do you have any further questions? Or can we proceed to the ruling? I walked back to my table, but I didn't sit down. I reached into my backpack and pulled out the heavy leather-bound diary and the thick file Sterling had prepared. I held them against my chest, feeling the heartbeat of my grandfather's legacy pulsing through the paper. I do not rest my case, Your Honor, I said, my voice ringing with a new authority that made the sleepy bailiff sit up straight. In light of the plaintiff's testimony regarding the worthlessness of the estate and their explicit sworn intent to destroy it, I would like to call a rebuttal witness, a special witness who can shed some light on the true value of what they are trying to bulldoze. The opposing lawyer stood up, objecting instantly. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We were not notified of any additional witnesses. The judge looked at me, intrigued by the fire in my eyes. Who is this witness, Ms. Jenkins? I turned toward the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. I call Mr. Marcus Sterling, senior partner of Sterling and Associates and the executor of the Vanguard Trust. The doors swung open as if on cue. The room gasped. Marcus Sterling did not just walk into a room, he owned it. He strode down the center aisle in a charcoal suit that cost more than Greg's car, carrying a briefcase that looked like it contained nuclear codes. He ignored the stunned murmurs of the gallery. He ignored Greg, whose face had just drained of all color. He walked straight to the witness stand, locked eyes with me, and gave a barely perceptible nod. The trap was sprung. The executioner had arrived. The atmosphere in courtroom 4B shifted instantly. It was a change in air pressure, a sudden heaviness that silenced the whispering gallery and made the bailiff straighten his spine. Marcus Sterling walked down the center aisle with a stride that did not ask for permission. He moved with the quiet, terrifying grace of an apex predator entering a clearing. He wore a charcoal suit that was tailored to perfection, and in his hand he carried a briefcase that looked like it held the secrets of nations. Judge Lawrence, a man known for his boredom and his tendency to rush through afternoon dockets, actually took the spectacles off his nose. He squinted, leaned forward, and then blinked rapidly as if he were trying to clear a hallucination. Mr. Sterling, the judge, asked, his voice losing its bored drone and pitching up into something resembling awe. Marcus Sterling. I have not seen you in these halls in 20 years, Your Honor. Sterling replied, his voice deep and resonant, projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. I thought you had retired to manage the Vanguard Trust exclusively, the judge said, signaling the bailiff to open the gate. To what do we owe the honor of your presence in a small claims inheritance dispute? I am here to correct a significant error in the record, Sterling said, stepping up to the witness stand. He did not look at Greg or Bianca. He treated them as if they were furniture. He placed his briefcase on the ledge, clicked the gold latches open, and withdrew a single thick document bound in blue paper. You may be seated, the judge said, waving a hand dismissively at Greg's lawyer, who was still standing with his mouth open trying to figure out why the most powerful attorney in the Southeast was interfering in a property spat. Sterling sat. He adjusted his cuffs. He looked at the jury, making eye contact with every single member until they were leaning forward, captivated. The plaintiff has spent the last hour characterizing the late Otis Jenkins as a simple, senile gardener with no assets other than a rotting wooden structure, Sterling began. This characterization is not only factually incorrect, it is a legal absurdity. Bianca let out a scoff, loud and sharp. He was a gardener. We have his tax returns. Order. Judge Lawrence slammed his gavel down with a violence that made Bianca jump. One more outburst. Mrs. Davis and I will have you removed. Mr. Sterling, please continue. Thank you, Your Honor. Sterling opened the blue file. In 1970, Otis Jenkins did indeed work as a gardener. However, he was also the silent equity partner in a startup venture known as Vanguard Logistics. Due to the prejudices of the era, his name was kept off the public charter. Instead, his 50% ownership was placed into a blind trust governed by a sleeping contract. The room went so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Greg's face had turned the color of old ash. He knew the name Vanguard. Everyone in Atlanta knew Vanguard. Sterling lifted a piece of paper. This document is the original incorporation agreement signed by myself and Mr. Jenkins. It verifies that for 50 years, Otis Jenkins has been the anonymous co-owner of one of the largest shipping conglomerates in North America. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle on the room like a physical blanket. The plaintiffs believe they are fighting over a shack worth $5,000. In reality, they are litigating the rightful ownership of 15% of Vanguard's total stock. Sterling turned slowly to look at Bianca, whose arrogance had drained away, leaving only naked fear, which as of this morning's market opening is valued at $52 million. The number $52 million did not just silence the room. It sucked the oxygen right out of it. Judge Lawrence leaned so far over his bench I thought he might tip over. The jury looked from the old man in the expensive suit to the woman in the cheap cardigan, trying to reconcile the two realities. But Marcus Sterling was not finished. He was just getting started. He treated the stunned silence as his podium. He adjusted his silk tie, looking at my family with the cold detachment of a coroner examining a corpse. He opened the blue folder again. the sound of the paper turning echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. I will read from the founding partnership agreement dated August 4th, 1974. Sterling announced. His voice was steady, a deep baritone that commanded absolute submission. It is titled The Architect Clause. He began to read, and every word was a hammer blow to the narrative my family had built. While the public face of Vanguard shall remain white to satisfy the banking institutions of the era, the heart of Vanguard remains the intellectual property of Otis Jenkins. He is not merely an investor. He is the architect. Every truck route, every distribution hub, every logistical algorithm that powers this company was conceived in his mind. He is the engine. I am merely the paint. Sterling paused, looking up from the document to stare directly at my mother in the gallery. Joyce was gripping the wooden railing in front of her, her knuckles turning bone white. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She was not looking at Sterling. She was looking at the grainy photo of Grandpa Otis that had been entered into evidence earlier, the one where he looked tired and old in his gardening clothes. She was realizing in real time that she had treated a titan of industry like a nuisance. She had insulted a man who could have bought and sold her entire social circle 10 times over. She had called a genius a burden. Sterling continued reading. Otis chose to live humbly to teach his descendants the value of labor. He chose to hide his wealth to protect them from their own greed. Therefore, the entirety of Mr. Jenkins's interest, including all dividends, compound interest, and voting shares, shall be tethered strictly to his primary residence at 42 Oak Street. I watched Greg's lawyer slowly close his eyes and put his head in his hands. He knew what was coming. He knew his clients had already walked off the cliff. This property is the anchor. Sterling read, his voice rising in power. It is the symbol of his humble beginnings and his secret triumph. The trust stipulates that the heir must prove their worthiness by protecting this structure. The house is the vault. The shares are the contents. You cannot have one without the other. Sterling closed the folder with a sharp snap. He took off his glasses and looked at Bianca, who was trembling so violently her bracelets were rattling against the table. And here is the final condition, Sterling said, reciting it from memory. Should any heir attempt to sell, subdivide, or demolish said property, or should they publicly declare an intent to destroy the structure, they shall be deemed unworthy of the legacy. In such an event, the trust is immediately voided for that beneficiary. The assets are locked, and the inheritance bypasses the offending party entirely. The judge looked at the court stenographer. Read back the plaintiff's testimony from 10 minutes ago, please. The stenographer nodded and read in a flat, monotone voice. Mrs. Davis stated, I will smash it this afternoon if I can. It is garbage. I will bulldoze it into the dirt. Sterling smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Thank you. By her own sworn testimony, Bianca Davis has just disqualified herself from the trust. She called a $52 million asset garbage, and in doing so, she forfeited her right to touch a single dime of it. The scream that followed did not come from Bianca. It came from the gallery. It was a guttural, animalistic sound of despair that made the hair on my arms stand up. Joyce Davis, the woman who cared more about status than her own blood, stood up. Her eyes were wide and unseeing, fixed on a point in the distance. My father, she gasped, the air wheezing in her throat. We threw it away. She took a stumbling step into the aisle, her hands clutching her chest as if her heart were trying to escape. 50 million, she choked out. We burned $50 million. Her knees buckled. She didn't catch herself. She collapsed onto the hard floor of the courtroom with a heavy, sickening thud. The room erupted into chaos. Bailiffs rushed forward. Greg was frozen in his chair, staring at the wall, catatonic. Bianca was screaming at her lawyer to fix it, to rewind time. But I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table, watching the woman who wished I was dead fall apart because she finally realized the cost of her cruelty. She hadn't just lost a lawsuit. She had realized that for her entire life, she had been walking past a gold mine, kicking the dirt, complaining about the dust. The chaos in the courtroom eventually subsided into a tense, vibrating silence. The paramedics had wheeled my mother out on a stretcher, her face an ashen mask of shock, leaving an empty space in the gallery that felt like a crater. Bianca stood near the plaintiff's table, her makeup streaked, looking between the doors where our mother had vanished and the judge who held her fate in his hands. She looked small now. The arrogance that had fueled her for weeks had evaporated, replaced by the terrified realization of a gambler who had bet the mortgage on a bluff and lost. Judge Lawrence cleared his throat. He looked at the medical team leaving, then turned his gaze back to Marcus Sterling. The judge's face was pale, his hands resting on the blue folder that contained the secret history of Vanguard Logistics. He seemed to be wrestling with the magnitude of what had just been revealed. This was no longer a small claims dispute about a dilapidated shack. It was a corporate transfer of power that would ripple through the entire Atlanta economy. Mr. Sterling, the judge, said, his voice grave. You have presented the court with the architect clause. You have established the conditions set forth by the late Mr. Jenkins. Based on the testimony we heard today, how does the trust interpret the actions of the potential heirs? Sterling stood tall, looking like a statue of justice carved from granite. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward the jury box, ensuring every person there understood the gravity of the verdict. The trust is binary, Your Honor. Sterling declared, his voice echoing off the marble walls. It operates on a simple switch. Preservation or destruction. There is no middle ground. Mr. Jenkins designed it this way because he believed that how you treat the smallest asset is how you will treat the largest. Sterling turned slowly to point a finger at Bianca. The finger was steady, accusatory, and damning. The plaintiff, Bianca Davis, has stated under oath with great passion her intent to obliterate the physical anchor of this trust. She called the legacy garbage. She pledged to bring bulldozers to the site this very afternoon. By her own words, she has triggered the exclusionary protocol. She has proven she does not value the root, and therefore she cannot touch the fruit. She is effectively disinherited from the Vanguard equity. Bianca let out a strangled sob, reaching for Greg's arm, but Greg pulled away from her, staring at the floor, his mind likely calculating the millions he had just let slip through his fingers. Sterling then turned to me. His expression softened. The hard lines of his face relaxed into a look of profound respect. The defendant, Keisha Jenkins, has done the opposite. She has endured ridicule, harassment, financial ruin, and public humiliation to protect the structure. She cleaned the floors by candlelight. She fought off the city inspectors. She stood in front of a moving bulldozer. She proved through action rather than words that she understands the value of what Otis Jenkins built. Sterling walked back to the witness stand and picked up the blue folder. He held it out toward me, a ceremonial offering. Therefore, as the executor of the Vanguard Trust, I am formally activating the sleeping shares. The condition has been met. The 15% equity stake in Vanguard Logistics, along with all voting rights, board seats, and accumulated capital, is hereby transferred solely and exclusively to Ms. Keisha Jenkins. The judge slammed his gavel down. It sounded like a gunshot ending a war. The court finds in favor of the defendant. Judge Lawrence ruled, his voice brooking no argument. The injunction is denied. The will stands. And based on the evidence provided by the trust, the ownership of the Vanguard shares is confirmed. Case dismissed. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the reality crashed down on Bianca. She lunged toward the railing, her eyes wild. No, you can't do this. It's a trick. Grandpa was crazy. That paper is 50 years old. Sterling stepped in her path, blocking her view of me. It is not a trick, Mrs. Davis. It is a contract. And you just breached it. He leaned in close to her, his voice low but audible enough for me to hear. You wanted the house so badly, Bianca. You wanted to tear it down to build a parking lot for your spa. Well, the irony is your share of the inheritance alone would have been $26 million. You could have built 100 spas. But you were so obsessed with destroying your sister that you set fire to your own future. Greg finally looked up. 26 million, he whispered, his voice cracking. We lost $26 million. No, Sterling corrected him, adjusting his tie. You didn't lose it, you gave it away. You stood on a witness stand and threw it in the trash because you were too proud to see the value in a wooden shack. I stood up, feeling the weight of the folder Sterling had placed in my hands. It was heavy, but it wasn't a burden. It was a shield. I looked at Bianca and Greg, watching them implode under the crushing weight of their own greed. I didn't feel the need to scream or gloat. The silence was loud enough. I turned my back on them and walked toward the exit with Marcus Sterling at my side, leaving them alone in the ruin they had created for themselves. The gavel had struck, dismissing the case, but the air in the courtroom remained electrified, thick with the residue of a life-changing verdict. The gallery was buzzing with hushed whispers, reporters were furiously typing on their phones, and the bailiffs were beginning to move toward the exits. However, in the well of the courtroom, time seemed to stand still. I stood at the defendant's table, feeling unmoored, as if the gravity that held me to the earth had suddenly shifted. Marcus Sterling did not rush. He treated the moment with the solemnity of a coronation. He walked around the heavy oak table and stood directly in front of me, blocking my view of my weeping sister and the empty space where my mother had collapsed. He placed the blue portfolio on the table between us. It was thick, bound in leather that smelled of old libraries and expensive decisions. He unzipped the main compartment, revealing a stack of certified bank documents and stock certificates that looked crisp and official. Keisha Sterling said, his voice low enough that only I could hear, yet carrying a weight that felt seismic. The court has spoken, but the bank requires a formal transfer. This is the finalized audit of the Vanguard Trust, as of this morning's trading bell. He turned the binder around so the summary page faced me. I looked down. I expected to see legal jargon. I expected to see complicated clauses. Instead, I saw a single line at the bottom of the page, bolded and highlighted. Total liquidatable assets, $52,480,000. I stared at the zeros. They danced before my eyes. 52 million. It was a number so large it felt fictitious. It was enough to buy the entire neighborhood where my cabin stood. It was enough to fund the history museum for a century. It was enough to ensure that I would never ever have to eat instant noodles in the dark again unless I chose to. That is the current valuation, Sterling explained, tapping the paper with a manicured finger. It includes the original 15% stake plus 50 years of reinvested dividends. As of this moment, you are not just an heiress. You are the largest individual shareholder in Vanguard Logistics. You have a seat on the board. You have the power to shape the future of the company your grandfather built. My hands trembled as I reached out to touch the paper. It felt cool and smooth. This was what they had killed for. This was what they had destroyed their souls to obtain. Suddenly, a guttural noise broke my trance. It was a sound of pure feral desperation. I looked up to see Greg. He was standing 10 feet away, his face drained of all color, leaving his skin a sickly waxen gray. His eyes were locked on the binder in front of me. He looked like a man watching his oxygen supply being cut off. The arrogance, the swagger, the CEO persona, it was all gone. All that remained was a terrified, greedy man who had just realized he had thrown a winning lottery ticket into a fire. That is not right," Greg stammered, his voice shaking. He took a step forward, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. "You said the house was worth nothing. You said it was a shack. You tricked us." Sterling didn't even turn around. He simply closed the binder. "We did not trick you, Mr. Davis. We tested you, and you failed." The finality of those words seemed to snap something inside Greg's brain. The reality of the loss, the $26 million that could have been his, if he had just been kind, if he had just respected the legacy, was too much for him to process. His eyes went wide and wild. "Give it to me," Greg shrieked. He lunged. It happened in slow motion. Greg cleared the distance between the tables in 2 strides, his hands clawing out, reaching for the blue binder, as if snatching it would somehow rewrite the court's decision. He wasn't attacking me. He was attacking the money. He wanted to hold it, to possess it, to stop it from slipping away. But he never reached the table. Before I could even flinch, two bailiffs who had been watching him closely moved with practiced efficiency. One stepped in front of me, a wall of uniformed muscle. The other intercepted Greg mid-lunge. There was a sickening thud as bodies collided. Greg was tackled hard, his expensive suit slamming against the polished floor. His arm flailed out, knocking a pitcher of water off the plaintiff's table. Glass shattered, scattering across the floor like diamonds mixing with the water soaking into Greg's clothes. "Get off me! It's mine! It's family money!" Greg screamed. His face pressed against the floor tiles, spit flying from his mouth. He was thrashing like a trapped animal, kicking his legs, completely abandoning his dignity. "She stole it. She tricked the old man." "Officers," the judge barked from the bench, standing up. "Restrain that man immediately." The bailiff twisted Greg's arm behind his back. I heard the distinct metallic click of handcuffs ratcheting tight. The sound echoed through the silent courtroom, a final punctuation mark to Greg's career. I stood there, my hand still resting on the $52 million binder, looking down at my brother-in-law. He was panting, his hair disheveled, his cheek pressed into the wet floor. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears of rage and loss. "Keisha, please," he wheezed, the fight suddenly draining out of him as the cold steel cut into his wrists. "We can work this out. We are family. Don't do this." I looked at Sterling. The lawyer stood impassively, adjusting his cuffs, unmoved by the display. Then I looked back at Greg. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel fear. I just felt a profound, distant pity. "We were family, Greg," I said softly. "But you bulldozed that too." The bailiffs hauled him to his feet and marched him toward the side exit. Bianca was sobbing in the corner, unable to even look at her husband. I watched him go. Then I picked up the blue binder. It was heavy, but for the first time in my life, the weight didn't feel like a burden. It felt like freedom. The commotion surrounding Greg's physical outburst had barely settled when the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open again. This time it was not a solitary figure like Sterling entering the fray. It was a phalanx of 4 uniformed police officers, led by a detective in a cheap suit, who looked like he had been waiting for the signal all morning. They did not look at the judge or the jury. They moved with military precision directly toward the defense table where Greg was still struggling against the bailiff's grip, his face flushed with humiliation. Mr. Sterling had not just prepared a civil defense, he had prepared a criminal prosecution. Gregory Davis, the detective, announced, his voice cutting through the lingering murmurs of the gallery. "You are under arrest." Greg blinked, sweat dripping down his temple. "Arrested? For what?" "I was just upset. It is a civil court. You cannot arrest me for yelling." The detective ignored his protests, pulling a folded warrant from his jacket pocket. He held it up for Greg and the cameras to see. "This is not for disorderly conduct, Mr. Davis. This is a felony warrant for forgery in the first-degree subornation of perjury and criminal destruction of property." The room gasped collectively. I watched from my table, my hand still resting on the blue binder. The evidence we had gathered, the IP logs from the spa, the video of the bulldozer, and the fake medical records had been quietly handed over to the district attorney days ago. Sterling had timed the strike perfectly. He let Greg lose the money first, stripping him of his resources before taking his freedom. "We have the wire transfer records from your business account to Dr. Eris Thorne." The detective continued, tightening the handcuffs that were already on Greg's wrists. $10,000 in exchange for a falsified medical affidavit declaring Otis Jenkins incompetent. That is fraud, sir. And we have video evidence of you operating heavy machinery to destroy property you did not own. You are looking at 10 to 15 years. Greg's knees buckled. The weight of the words hit him harder than the bailiff's tackle. He looked frantically around the room, his eyes landing on Bianca. She was standing near the railing, her mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks, looking like a cornered animal. "Bianca," Greg screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Tell them! Tell them we did it together. Call the lawyer. Do not let them take me. The air in the room seemed to freeze. All eyes turned to Bianca. This was the woman who had stood by his side as they plotted to steal my inheritance. This was the wife who had toasted to their victory just last night. But as she looked at her husband now, a handcuffed felon facing a decade in prison, the calculation behind her eyes shifted. She saw a sinking ship, and Bianca Davis was a survivor. She took a step back, raising her hands as if to physically ward him off. No, she shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing. I didn't sign anything. It was him. It was all Greg's idea. Greg froze, his mouth falling open in sheer disbelief. What? Bianca, you wrote the email to the museum. You found the doctor. He is lying, Bianca yelled, turning to the detective, pointing a shaking finger at her husband. He is abusive. He forced me to go along with it. I told him to leave Keisha alone, but he was obsessed with the land. I am a victim here. Take him away. The betrayal was absolute. I watched Greg's face crumble. The anger drained out of him, replaced by the hollow, shattered look of a man who realizes he has truly lost everything. He had lost the money, he had lost his freedom, and now he had lost the illusion of his marriage. The officers didn't wait for the domestic dispute to resolve. They hauled Greg toward the side exit, his feet dragging on the floor, his head hanging low. Bianca continued to scream hysterically, listing his crimes to anyone who would listen, trying desperately to wash the guilt from her own hands. I stood in the center of the storm, feeling strangely untouched by the chaos. I looked at Sterling, who was calmly packing his briefcase. They deserve each other, I said softly. Sterling snapped the lock shut and looked at me. They built a house on sand, Keisha. It was bound to collapse. The storm just arrived a little earlier than they expected. I watched the doors close behind Greg, then looked at Bianca, who was now sobbing into her hands alone in the courtroom. The empire of greed they had built had not just fallen, it had been pulverized. And I was the one left standing. The marble lobby of the courthouse felt miles away from the humid, cramped cabin where I had spent the last 3 weeks. My heels clicked against the floor with a rhythm of victory as I walked toward the exit, flanked by Marcus Sterling and his team of bodyguards. The air tasted different now. It tasted like expensive leather and absolute freedom. But before I could reach the revolving doors, a frantic commotion erupted behind us. Keisha! Keisha! Wait! I recognized the voice immediately. It was the same voice that had told me to disappear just 24 hours ago. I stopped and turned slowly. My mother Joyce was scrambling across the lobby, supported by my father, who looked pale and shaken. They had recovered from the shock of the courtroom just enough to realize that their least favorite daughter was now the most powerful person in the family. They caught up to us near the security checkpoint, breathless and desperate. My mother's eyes were swollen, her makeup smeared, but she summoned a trembling, pathetic smile. She reached out, trying to grab my hands, but I took a sharp step back. Her fingers grasped at empty air. Keisha, baby, please, she panted, clutching her chest. You have to understand. We were under so much pressure. Greg and Bianca, they confused us. We didn't know the truth about Grandpa. My father nodded vigorously, finding his voice for the first time. We were just trying to protect you, Keisha. We thought the house was a burden. We didn't want you to be saddled with debt. We are your parents. We only ever wanted what was best for you. I looked at them. Really looked at them for the first time in years. I didn't see authority figures. I didn't see love. I saw two strangers who had spent a lifetime betting on the wrong horse and were now terrified of being left behind at the track. You wanted what was best for me. I repeated, my voice flat and emotionless. Is that why you sent me a text message wishing I was dead? Is that why you sat in that courtroom and called me unstable while perjury flowed out of your mouth? My mother flinched as if I had slapped her. That was just anger speaking, honey. Families fight. We say things we don't mean. But we can fix this. We can start over. You need help managing all this. You need family around you to protect that money. I almost laughed. It was so transparent. They didn't want to be my family. They wanted to be my managers. They wanted access to the $52 million they had just watched slip through their fingers. I looked at Sterling. He gave me a small nod, signaling that the car was ready. I turned back to my parents. The anger was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, sterile indifference. I do not need your help, I said, adjusting the strap of my bag. And I certainly do not need your protection. I have the best lawyers in the city for that. I turned and walked through the glass doors, stepping out into the bright Atlanta sunshine. A long black limousine was idling at the curb, its driver holding the door open. I slid into the cool, dark interior. My mother ran out onto the sidewalk, banging her hands against the window as the glass rolled up. Keisha, you can't leave us like this. We are your family. I pressed the button for the intercom, leaning close to the speaker so they could hear me one last time. You made your choice years ago, Mom, I said, looking at her distorted reflection in the tinted glass. You have Bianca. She is the golden child you always wanted. Go comfort her. I signaled the driver. The car pulled away smoothly, merging into traffic, leaving my parents standing on the curb, shrinking in the rearview mirror until they were nothing but small, insignificant specks in my past. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the panoramic view of Atlanta from the penthouse suite. It was quiet here, the kind of expensive silence that thick glass and high altitude provided. I walked across the marble floor, the heels of my shoes clicking with a rhythm that was no longer tentative but authoritative. I reached for the crystal decanter on the sideboard and poured a glass of vintage Cabernet. The liquid was dark and rich, swirling against the glass, catching the light of the setting sun. It had been 6 months since the trial. 6 months since Greg was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for fraud. 6 months since Bianca filed for bankruptcy after the bank foreclosed on her unfinished spa project. I heard she was managing a retail store in the suburbs, now selling the very discount clothes she used to mock. My parents had tried to call a few times, leaving weeping voicemails about family unity, but I had changed my number. They were part of a past I had pruned away like dead branches on a healthy tree. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the city. From up here, the cars looked like toys, the people like ants. But my eyes were drawn to a patch of green in the distance, a small, stubborn square of forest in a sea of concrete. I could just barely make out the roof of the cabin at 42 Oak Street. It was not a rotting shack anymore. I had restored it. Every board was sanded, every window replaced, the foundation reinforced with steel and concrete. It was beautiful. It was a private museum now, a sanctuary, where I spent my weekends reading Grandpa's books and tending to his garden. The roses were blooming again, brighter than ever, fed by the best fertilizer money could buy. I took a sip of the wine, letting the warmth spread through my chest. Grandpa Otis had played the longest game in history. He had turned a humble life into a trap for the greedy and a throne for the patient. He taught me that value is not always visible on the surface. Sometimes the most precious things are wrapped in dust and old leather. I swirled the wine one last time, watching the city lights flicker on below me. I was no longer the scared librarian cleaning up other people's messes. I was the architect of my own life. I raised the glass to the reflection in the window, to the ghost of the old man who started it all, and to the woman standing there now. I smiled, a sharp, dangerous curve of the lips. Never underestimate the value of old things. They have survived for a reason. And never ever provoke a woman who knows how to preserve the past. Because while you are fighting for the moment, she is waiting for the eternity. The saga of the Jenkins estate reveals a timeless truth: character is the ultimate investment. While others chase the superficial allure of quick cash, they fail to see that true wealth is often hidden beneath layers of history and patience. Greed blinds us to value, causing us to destroy the very things that could save us. Keisha's victory proves that when you honor your roots and stand firm in your integrity, the world eventually bends to your will. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and revenge, follow for the next gripping story series.